war that took place between Athens and Sparta, and we'll move forward from there. So, as we're following along with this, guys, make sure you're paying attention to the terms and names. There'll be 5 terms and names that I have on there, as well as some multiple choice questions as well. So make sure you're following along. If you'd like to take notes, go ahead and take notes. So, as we're looking at this, okay, for about 50 years, really, Athens is going to experience a growth as far as intellectual and artistic learning that takes place. It's usually going to be called what's known as the Golden Age of Athens. And during this time, we see art, drama, sculpture, poetry, philosophy, all of the above that are really important parts to this. And we even look at things like architecture, because it influences so much of our world as we kind of know it. So that's going to be another thing that we look at during this time period. So Pericles happens to be one of the people in charge of Athens, and he has a plan for it. During this age of Pericles, he has 3 very big goals that he wants to accomplish. Number 1 is going to be strengthen the Athenian democracy that existed at the time. Number 2, he wants to hold and strengthen the entire empire itself. And then lastly, he wants to look for ways to glorify Athens, that being through art, through beautification of those things, all becomes a part of it. And so the first part that he wants to do is strengthen democracy. How do you do that? A couple ways. Number 1, you increase the number of public officials with paid salaries. Public officials could be anything from along the lines of like a mailman or something like that. That would be a public official. In terms of judges, juries, not juries, but judges are a part of this as well. And when you do this, when you increase the number of public officials, especially with paid salaries, you increase the number of people who are involved in democracy. That could be both poor and wealthy. There are some things that are different with this, because only wealthier Athenian citizens could afford to hold public office prior to what Pericles does by increasing these officials. Now, some of the poorest citizens can actually come in and help out with this. And so that makes Athens one of the most democratic governments in history at that time. There's also this introduction of something called direct democracy. That is a system in which people rule directly rather than through representatives. So within our country right now, we have something called representative democracy, where we vote on our elected officials, all right? In a direct democracy, usually what we see is citizens rule altogether. The problems that come about with direct democracy is that there's so many people who have to go. Everything kind of has to go through a vote, all right, in some way, shape, or form. But in a representative democracy, if you are voting for a representative to you, then that is how that works. So in a representative democracy, what we usually see is we vote for governors, senators, different types of House of Representatives, and obviously the big one being President of the United States. They are our representatives to what we do. And that becomes a big part of that, of who we are. So the direct democracy versus representative democracy is a big thing to understand. Direct democracy is direct rule by the citizens. Representative democracy is that of a rule by representation that is voted on. All right. So the empire itself of Athens, all right, after the defeat of the Persians, we have the organization of the Delian League. And over time, Athens will take this over. And in doing so, they will dominate all the city-states that existed throughout the Athenian Empire. Pericles will use the money from the Delian League to make the Athenian navy really the strongest in the Mediterranean Sea. Why is that? Well, Athens doesn't really have fertile ground. Again, we've talked about the terrain within Greece and how it's not great for growing, and Athens is not different. So they don't have fertile ground, so they need overseas trade in order to prosper. Essential things like grain, other raw materials are vitally important. So the Athenian military might, especially in the navy, is necessary because they have to sail all throughout places like the Aegean Sea in order to be able to survive. So taking over and using the Delian League money makes for a great way for them to actually have this ability. The Athenian military might also let Pericles treat other members of the Delian League as a part of their empire. So when we look at Athens, Athens becomes a very prominent place within Greece because they took over the Delian League. This will eventually lead to a lot of problems with Sparta, and we'll end up fighting the Peloponnesian War after this. So Pericles will also use money from the Delian League to make Athens beautiful. How does he do this? He will pay for art that he commissions to be done, architecture as well. They'll buy huge sums of things like gold, ivory, and marble to build their really palaces that they have throughout this time. So this is one of the marvels that is in this world, and it still stands today. It's called the Parthenon. Right? It's a huge masterpiece that exists. Within the Parthenon, it's a 23,000 square foot building, and it's built to honor Athena, who was the goddess of ancient Greece, or the goddess of wisdom, excuse me. And there's a huge statue that existed within the Parthenon that was a part of, that was a statue of Athena. And it's built in what's called the classical art. The art of ancient Greece is really what this is, and partially Rome. It emphasizes things like harmony, order, proportion, all of those things. So you don't see any abstract ideas to this. And you can look at this picture here of the Parthenon and just see the beauty that is, and the way it's built, the fact that it is still standing. Obviously, there's some things that have happened to it. You can see that there was probably at once some type of a cover on this, but the beauty of it to last as long as it has, and the structure and the ability to build this is just incredible. So the Parthenon is a huge aspect of this. So some of the buildings that we see that are modeled in the classical style that take from this, you can see here the National Archives, the Lincoln Memorial, and the Supreme Court. These are buildings within our own country that are used to model the classical style with the big columns. Okay, on top you see things that are called the friezes, okay, that exist up there, and these are all a part of what we have today that kind of reflects the beautiful art that we have, and you can see it is appreciated so well using things like marble to build these different aspects. So it's an awesome tribute to it. Next, you have things like drama and history. A tragedy, okay, is a serious form of drama about common themes. Usually love, hate, war, betrayal are all parts of a tragedy. It usually features a tragic hero for the most part. And the hero is usually an important person and often gifted with these extraordinary abilities. Aeschylus rates 80 plays, including the Oresteia about Agamemnon. If you've never heard of the story about Agamemnon, go check it out. It's actually a really cool story, but he writes about these things. as well. Next, also talking about this is more to it is comedy. There's a comedy aspect of things as well, in which it's a humorous form of drama, often includes some type of like slapstick humor that exists. Playwrights will often make fun of things like politics and respected people of the time itself. So they're all parts of these things as well. History, okay, is another aspect that starts getting built up during this time. Thucydides, excuse me, is the most decorated historian of his time. We know that there isn't a whole bunch of written records from the Dorian period. The epics of Homer are really all that we have to recount those stories. But some of that stuff is not accurate in terms of some of the history that we have coming out of the Dorian period. But Thucydides, he believed that certain types of events and political situations reoccur. We understand, and we can talk about a little bit how history repeats itself. That's one of the more famous things as to reasons why people study history, or they say, why should I study history? Well, history repeats itself. I think you guys have probably turned or heard of that. It does and it doesn't in a lot of ways. Sometimes it reoccurs, but it reoccurs in different ways. And then there's obviously things that happen that we don't want to ever have reoccur. Things like wars and such. So all of those things become a part of it. And Thucydides believed that studying those events over time would help in understanding the present. It wasn't necessarily to prevent it like we see so much today when people talk about history. They're like, oh, we do it to prevent things from happening. No, what we're really doing is trying to understand what's going on, within our present day culture that we see. So that was something that was a part of this. So shifting gears a little bit from what the Athenians did to kind of how we got to this point. If you recall, taking over the Delian League by the Athenians was something that was frowned upon by a lot of people, mainly, okay, the Spartans. The Spartans are a warlike society. They're a warlike city-state that exists, and they are not happy with what Athens has done in taking over. So Sparta really becomes tired of being taken advantage of, and they declare war on Athens in 431 BCE. And this leads us to what's known as the Peloponnesian War. The Peloponnesian War is going to last about close to 30 years, in which Athens will finally be defeated by Sparta. At the time, the two city-states are incredibly powerful. They're the two most powerful city-states within Greece at that time. Athens has the stronger navy. Sparta, the stronger army. Why? Well, Athens is located along the coast. We've talked about that. We've seen that. If you look at maps, you can understand why Athens' navy would be stronger. They are right in the middle of the coast, right on the coast. And so they have a rather strong navy. Sparta is located right in the middle of one of the islands, and they have a much stronger army. Why? Because there's no need for them to have a strong navy. They don't live on the coast. So you have really two conflicting ideals here coming to power. Athens believes they could survive the entire debacle as long as their ships could sail in and out of the port with supplies. Well, in the second year of the war, Athens will suffer a deadly plague. It sweeps through the city, killing perhaps a third of the population, one of those being Pericles. Although weakened, Athens continues to fight for several years. Then in 421 BC, the two sides, worn down by war, will sign a truce in 421. The truce doesn't last, however. Right? In 415 BC, Athens will send a huge fleet that's carrying more than 20,000 soldiers to the island of Sicily. Now you're saying, well, why are we talking about Sicily here? Athens attempts to destroy the city-state of Syracuse, and Syracuse is Sparta's ally. So of course they are going to come to the aid of their ally. Sparta will go in and fend off the Athenians and crush their army, all right, in 413 BC. Somehow, a terribly weakened Athens is still able to fend off Spartan attacks for another 9 years. Finally, in the year 404 BCE, they will surrender and lose all power to Athens. That means power and wealth as well. Shifting gears again from the Peloponnesian War to now philosophers. A philosopher really is a thinker who uses logic and reason to investigate the nature of the universe, human society, and morality as well. And they follow two very distinct assumptions. Number one, the universe is put together in an orderly way and subject to absolute unchanging laws, and people can understand those laws using logic and reason. So again, universe put together in an orderly way and subject to unchanging laws, and that people understand those laws because they have logic and reason. Those are two of the important parts of this. One group of philosophers, known as the sophists, okay, begin to question people's unexamined beliefs or ideas about things like justice, traditional values, and so on and so forth. One of the famous sophists was Protagoras, okay, who questioned the existence of the traditional Greek gods and also argues that there is no universal standard of truth. They're very radical and very dangerous ideas to a lot of Athenians during this time. A critic of the sophists was a man by the name of Socrates. Okay? Unlike the sophists, he is going to believe that absolute standards do exist for truth and justice. He encourages the Greeks to go farther, question themselves in a lot of different ways, and he begins to think that the unexamined life is not worth living. What does that mean? If you don't look at your life and try to learn from it, okay, then what is the point of even living if you aren't trying to better yourself or do anything to make yourself better? So the unexamined life isn't worth living. And he's this classical Greek philosopher. He creates a lot of ideals around Western philosophy. He has writings from his students that he teaches, one of the most famous ones being Plato. Plato's dialogues are some of the most comprehensive accounts of Socrates to actually survive, because we don't have a bunch of stuff on Socrates unless it was written really by Plato. And Plato was one of his students. Okay? He's the next one that we are going to talk about. He is a student of Socrates, as I said. In his late 20s, Socrates dies, and Plato will write down Socrates' ideas and conversations. Around 370 BC, Plato wrote his most famous work. It's titled The Republic. Excuse me. And it set forth his vision of a perfectly governed society. So the Republic is his work that he puts out. In his ideal society, all citizens fall naturally into three groups: farmers and artisans, warriors, and then the ruling class. The person with the greatest insight and intellect from the ruling class would be chosen as what was called a philosopher king. Plato's writings dominate a lot of philosophic thought in Europe for about 1,500 years. His only rivals are, one, his teacher, and two, his student. And his student is a man named Aristotle. Aristotle excuse me, is going to question the nature of the human world and human belief, thought, and knowledge. He comes close to summarizing all of the knowledge up to that time. He invents a method of arguing according to rules and logic. He will later apply his method to problems in the field of psychology and such, psychology, physics, and biology. One of his most famous pupils doesn't turn out to be a famous philosopher, but is Alexander the Great, who was the son of King Philip of Macedon. And Aristotle's ideals will be reflected in Aristotle's ideals will be reflected in a lot of what Alexander the Great does as his teacher, which we will talk more about Alexander the Great in our next section, section 4, when we talk really a lot about his ruling power. All right. So that is it for this section here.